Hi and welcome. This is a recording of a live Zoom presentation given by the Seed Library of Los Angeles, Pasadena Branch.
Good morning, everybody.
Wow.
Welcome as people are getting logged in. I'm sure Zoom already let you know, we're recording this meeting. We record and then we post to our YouTube channel so that folks that couldn't make it this morning have an opportunity to see the presentation. Just going to wait another minute to make sure everybody's connected. And Deborah, are you going to keep your eye on the waiting room? Okay. I'm going to start just by dropping, links in the chat. These are all SLOLA Altadena links. Our new membership form is there. Our YouTube channel link, our Instagram, our email, and our seed check-in form. So if you're a member who's growing and has seeds to return, please check out that check-in form, and you can email for how to turn seeds in. We always love to get seeds back. So I'm going to go ahead and officially start the meeting. So welcome to our February meeting. We had taken January off for seeds and presentations. We usually do that, and then again in July when it's about to be blazing hot in our gardens. So this is the Seed Library of Los Angeles, the Altadena branch Zoom version that we've been doing now for almost 2 years. We do work in partnership with the Altadena Library. Prior to COVID, we met in person there in their community room and hope to get back there soon. Krystal, who's actually one of our presenters today, was there at the very beginning at one of our very first meetings in the community room. So I'm going to hand it over. Oh, before I hand it over to Gina, I just want to say that our March meeting is going to be virtual, and we have a master gardener coming to talk to us about getting ready for spring in our gardens and everything we should be paying attention to, or tricks and tips. She's also, I think, a certified horticulturist, so she'll come with tons of information. Also, originally, we had hoped that today's presentation would be in person. And our presenters, Krystal Rains and Joe Parker, are really excited to still have that opportunity to do the in-person part. So we're hoping that later this year, maybe late summer-ish, we can have them back in person and do an in-person portion of the California Native Edibles. So keep an eye out for that as we get everything scheduled. So I'm going to hand it over to Gina. Oh, yeah. Are you going to remind me about volunteers?
No, I wasn't, but I will. But I was going to recommend that you mention, if anybody does not want to be in the video, because we are recording, that they should turn their cameras off.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. So yeah, if you don't want to be in the video, please turn your camera off. Also, we're always looking for new volunteers to help us out in all aspects of the seed library. I think right now, we hope to return to the farmers market, and we've been doing some tabling there once a month. Anybody that might be interested in helping us there, or with seed packing or anything else, just give us a holler. So let's see, Gina, I'm going to spotlight you so that you can just give us an overview of what the seed library is.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So we are a collective. We are held together by volunteers and then our members, which is you. So our main goals of SLOLA is to grow acclimated seeds to our specific bioregion. This is to cultivate crops and plants that are more resilient, hardy, and fruitful because they're naturalized to our weather right here in East LA. And that process takes about 7 seasons. We are also interested in building a community of gardeners and people who are interested in food security, habitat restoration, and wildlife, as well as a network of knowledge and wisdom so that we can cultivate communal resilience for us humans and the legacy of the seeds that we're growing and the wildlife that we cohabitate with. How SLOLA works, the meetings are always open and free for anybody to attend. And if you'd like to check out seeds, It's a one-time $10 donation, and you're invited to check out up to 4 seeds each month. And we use that term check out because the intention is that you'll be returning these seeds once you save them after the season. And the more we can grow and contribute, the more breadth we can have in our seed library. And we get a lot of our seeds from companies like Baker Creek. And if you do return seeds, they must be open pollinated, organic, and non-GMO. And if you want more information about some seeds that are more difficult to save because of hybridization, you can look at our resource page or contact us for a little more information on how to save seeds. And I'll turn it back to Jessica.
Okay, thank you, Gina. Okay, so a couple more things before I hand it over to our presenters is that we have a poll. We like to poll our audience to get a sense of where you're from, how you heard about the meeting. It's anonymous. So it's gonna pop up on your screen. It's just 3 questions. If you could just answer those quickly, that would be really helpful for us. Okay, so the poll is launched. And also, while you are answering the poll, our presenters are going to be presenting, and then they're going to take questions at the end. So please, if you have questions, put them in the chat. One of our volunteers, Sue, is going to be keeping track of all those questions and so that she can read them out at the end. So please just put them there, and they'll be asked at the end of the presentation. Okay, I'm going to give another, 30 seconds for the poll. As people are still, I can see people are still answering. Okay, just for the benefit of our presenters, the overwhelming majority of our participants today are from the greater Los Angeles area, Altadena, Pasadena, or a couple from Southern California. There's nobody here out of state. Okay. Last call on the poll. I'm going to turn it off. Thank you so much for answering those questions. That's helpful for us. Okay, so now we'll begin. So today we have California native enthusiasts, Joe Parker and Krystal Rains, who I'm so excited about this, have a presentation about California native edibles in particular to share with us. They have put a tremendous amount of work into this presentation. I'm so excited to hear about this. Hold on, sorry, something just popped up on my screen. I have to get rid of it. So without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to them. Let's see, so I'm going to spotlight both of you so that folks can be sure to find you. So let's see. And then I'm also going to spotlight Joe.
Always hate.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so take it away, you two.
Good morning. My name is Krystal Rains. I'm a longtime member of SLOLA. I originally was part of the San Fernando Valley branch that is now defunct because we lacked volunteers. So I've been really heartened to watch Altadena thrive. Native plants are my jam. I've been planting in native plants in my front yard since 2009 because I have a 70-year-old Western sycamore in the middle of it. I've really enjoyed creating this presentation. It's given me a reason to learn how to use the plants I already had in my yard even more.
My name's Joe Parker, and I live in the Altadena area, and I've been on how to work with native plants more effectively for about maybe 12 years now, and I'm still learning. It's just a fun process, and we have sort of selected for our presentation today plants that do well in the inland sort of full sun of the summer, but also there's always varieties, and we are going to talk about some varieties that do better on the coastal areas or much further inland in the Sonoran Desert area. So we're looking forward to just getting started, and let's go ahead and maybe start with the first slide.
Sorry, having trouble pulling it up. Just a
That's
second.
okay.
It's always something.
We wanted to start with just some introduction of some of the teachers that we've worked with. This is, at least Altadena is a area in the Tongva territory, traditional territory, Gabrielino Tongva, and also nearby is the Tataviam and the Serrano Cahuilla areas. So we are drawing on, if we could go to the next slide, we're drawing on knowledge that comes from Indigenous communities, and in particular from a couple of our teachers. I've learned a lot from folks who are members of a group called the Chia Cafe Collective, which includes Indigenous and non-Indigenous members. And that collective spoke at SLOLA in April 28th, 2019 about sustainability and resilience. And then Krystal has worked with a couple of other teachers. They're listed there on the slide. And these folks, many of them are still teaching quite actively. A few have passed away, but most of them are still teaching. And so we're going to be introducing ways to learn more beyond our presentation. Next slide, please. We are drawing on traditional ecological knowledge, which Indigenous communities transmit orally from generation to generation. And one thing that TEK, traditional ecological knowledge, asks us to do is to practice respect for plants and animals that are important in our lives, and how to care for plants and live together with them sustainably. And so I've been taught a particular protocol, and I've just listed some of these points here. These are from Barbara Drake, who was a Tongva elder until she passed away last year. Observe plants, listen to what they tell us, sing to plants at appropriate times, ask plants permission before harvesting, give to the plant before you take, usually a small piece of tobacco or piece of sage or cedar or something that's helpful to the plant. Never take more than half of what's on the plant, and show gratitude to plants for their gifts. Next slide, please. This is a picture of their book. It's available through Heyday Books. The website address is down at the bottom of the page. Next slide, please.
One of the things that we want to address, and I noticed that in the Instagram post image, it mentioned foraging. We want you to plant, not to forage, unless you forage in your own yard. Please use the information we're sharing today to add to your own yard, in the garden, or in pots. Please do not wildcraft or forage these plants for usage. There's been a significant overharvesting by wildcraft and foraging in our densely populated urban area, and this is not sustainable practicing. By adding these plants to our yards, gardens, porches, patios, and balconies, we help create a more sustainable environment for ourselves, our communities, and our local ecosystem. And while I'm not in the Altadena area, I'm in Encino, just off the 101 and 405 freeway. If you would like to forage, you're welcome to visit. Next slide. Planting from seeds. This is the seed library. So we wanted to address propagation of California. Most can be grown from seed, but they take longer than your average seeds and often require some form of scarification or soaking. Others will self-seed and provide lots of seeds, like nettle or the Cleon bladder pod that we'll be talking about later. Most nurseries and gardens propagate from cuttings. One of the problems with this type of propagation is it reduces the gene pool or perpetuates disease. Our recommendation is to source plants from different native nurseries and fellow neighborhood gardens to reduce these problems. Native plants don't require amendments or fertilizers. In fact, they will harm the plants. Native plants have adapted to our local soil conditions that are very low in nitrogen. In your garden, you will want an area rich in nitrogen for some of your garden, but not where you plant your natives. Mulch, even the free mulch from the cities, can be used for ground cover for soil health, but you do not want to pile it close to the roots. Often native plants have exposed root systems. Slow, deep watering to establish for at least the first year before drought tolerance is reached, and drought tolerance differs between species. I mentioned before the presentation, one of the reasons I do native plants is they survive on benign neglect, but not necessarily at the beginning. Next slide. So today we're overviewing, we've talked about the Southern California indigenous people and tech. We're going to be talking about direct substitutes, things that are easier to grow and prepare. Native plants needing new, easy kitchen skills, talking about native trees that have greater production, new tastes. We have some resources, both websites and print things. We're going to talk about plant websites and online resources, cookbooks, SoCal Tech resources, California edible native plant ingredient sources, other online resources, and nurseries. Next slide. Direct substitutes are currants. There are a number of varieties. Miner's lettuce, something late winter and early spring. One leaf onion, watercress, tepary beans and desert beans, hummingbird sage, and yerba santa. Next slide.
So currants are something that many of you already are familiar with. You can buy them often at the grocery store. There's the golden currant and many other varieties. Many of them have very fragrant leaves and can be quite productive at maturity. And so this is a very easy plant to work with. It does require at least partial shade, and is fairly drought tolerant. Next slide, please.
Miner's lettuce is found in shady areas in late winter, early spring. It's tasty and attractive addition to any salad. I have found this picture is in my own backyard. It's an east-facing wall in the backyard, so it gets minimal sun and very little heat. Even with that, it will only be here until probably mid-April. Next slide. A tasty tea. Yerba Santa, or known as saint herb in Spanish, is a helpful herb for upper respiratory conditions. A few leaves steeped in hot water is made tastier by adding a single hummingbird sage leaf to sweeten the flower. I intentionally planted Yerba Santa for herbal medicine just before during the early days of the pandemic. It was in researching this presentation I learned about adding the hummingbird sage leaf in a book on my own bookshelf that I hadn't read. Next slide. The picture on the left is hummingbird sage in Joe's yard. I also have it in my front yard. And the picture on the left is one of my 2 Yerba Santa tree plants in my backyard. One of the things I'm going to note, and I didn't take a picture of it, I planted 2 Yerba Santa plants. They are about 4 feet apart. And it is amazing the difference. This is the very prolific one, and the other one is struggling. I'm not necessarily sure what the difference is in the soil. I think that one of them is getting a little more water from my neighbor's yard. It's planted along a fence. Next slide.
So for those of you interested in food security, there are a number of native plants that provide protein, that provide carbohydrates, and we wanted to introduce a few of those in this presentation. There will also be some in the second presentation we'll be doing later this year. Tepary beans, and there's another bean called the Slim Jim bean or a desert bean. These are both hot weather beans. They can take full sun. They like sandy soils. And this is a picture of a page from the Chia Cafe Collective cookbook showing Lori Siskok and her recipe for how to cook the tepary beans and how to make them into a salad with the nopales cactus pads we'll be talking about later in the presentation. she tells a story. Lori Sisquak is part Cahuilla, part Apache, and works at the Sherman Indian School in Riverside. She tells a story that she heard from Albina Shiva, who's an important elder, was an important elder in the Cahuilla community, about their community growing beans, and that tradition had been lost in the Southern California area in the tribal traditional territory for the Serrano Indians. And so they, Lori Sisquak and other members of the Chia Cafe went to explore the Toho no Ojo Dam food revitalization project that's going on in the Tucson area in southern Arizona. Found this bean, which they were growing there, and then brought it back. And they're using this to try and revitalize a lost cultural tradition. Next slide, please. One leaf onion. This is one of the items you can cook. It's a very mild flavored onion. It's apparently fairly easy to grow, although I haven't grown this myself. And it is a native plant. There are other varieties, onion varieties that taste a little punchier if you like that, a little bit more like garlic, according to Antonio Sanchez, one of the teachers that I learned about this plant from. Please. Watercress is a pond plant. For those of you who hear that California is a desert, pond wouldn't work, but this is a native plant. It is one of the it's kind of easy greens to just put in a salad to serve by itself, and easy to grow if you happen to have a pond. I know it's drought conditions these days, so probably not very many of us have ponds, but this is a riparian plant, a plant that grows along or actually right in the water in streams. Next slide, please.
Stinging nettle. Nutritionally, nettle exceeds traditional greens, especially in protein and calcium. It's easily grown, sometimes too easily grown, and easily prepared. I will caution you to wear gloves. I've been working with nettle for over 10 years. I ended up in the hospital twice last year because I decided to weed without gloves. You blanch it in hot water to neutralize stingers is one way. Literally any cooking process and drying the plant tends to neutralize the stingers. I love it sauteed, and I also use it in an omelet. It's good dried, and it's made into a tea. It can be used with a lot of other herbs. There are some times where I sprinkle some of the dried flour into a dish, just like I would some parsley, because it's actually going to give you a lot more nutrition than that. It also contains a high amount of quercetin, which is helpful to alleviate allergies. And this is some nettle that's in my yard. It's kind of growing everywhere. Right now, it's good in the springtime, and it's easy to dry. I usually just pull it, snap off well, you can cut it at the root if you want to keep it in that area. Because I have it spreading widely in my yard, I tend to pull it up, snap off the roots, and just hang it on the back porch, and then store it in a jar. Next slide.
Prickly pear ice. Let's go to the next slide. I think the next slide is where we want to start. Let's go up 2 slides then. The other way, please. One more slide, please. Thank you.
There we go.
This is the native tuna cactus, Opuntia basilaris. This is a picture from Descanso Gardens. You can see that it has these small fruits on it in the non-native varieties, which is what my partner and I are growing in our backyard. The fruit can be quite a bit larger, and those make a lovely beverage. And you have to clean them off, obviously. You have to take off the spines, and also cut off the outside when you harvest the fruits. Cut off the outside skin, and then just put the inside part in a blender, and then you can make, next slide, please. Prickly pear ice cream, a nice summer beverage. If you don't freeze it, you can make paletas. It's just a very fun plant to work with. And then, of course, the pads. Next slide, please. The pads are a very important dish They have a wonderful light, kind of lemony taste to them. You want to harvest the pads quite young, and you can see them here on the griddle over an open fire. You want to harvest them when they're less than a foot long, and when they're still pretty thin, and not too. They get a little tough or woody when they get thicker than when they get very thick. And then you can use a knife, a regular kitchen knife. There are some specialized tools to kind of whisk off the little spines on the pads, and then just throw them in your griddle, or you can cut them up fresh and just toss them in some eggs or a stir fry or a soup. They do have a mucilaginous quality, which is very important sort of resource for folks who are trying to keep their blood sugar down, or people who have either prediabetes or diabetes. And this plant, among some of the other plants, are very high in fiber, have lots of mucilaginous quality to them, are some of the reasons why there was almost no diabetes in the indigenous communities before colonization. Next slide, please. Toyonberries. This is something you can grow it. It gets pretty large and maybe like 20 feet, 18, 20 feet tall if it has good conditions. It takes full sun, likes full sun. I just was talking with a friend yesterday, and apparently if you grow it in shade, you can get some problems with disease. And you could just take the berries, harvest the berries. They're usually ready to harvest in December or January. Right now, this is a picture from outside of my house just last week. And you can dry them out or rinse them off, dry them out, grind them up, put them in a beverage, and it makes a nice kind of lemonade sort of flavored beverage. Next slide, please. There's other recipes. You can make a fruit. These recipes are available pretty easily online. This is a recipe from the Haramonia Cultural Center up at Mount Wilson, and the old, for those of you know, the mountains around this area, Red Box. Next slide, please. Quail Bush. This is a plant that Antonio Sanchez has been talking about a lot lately. He's, and for those of you who don't know Antonio, he's gives lots of presentations about edible native plants all over the LA area online. Sometimes you can find him. He likes this plant because it's a relative of the amaranth and quinoa. It has, protein in it. It's very heat tolerant. It's actually something of a desert plant, and doesn't necessarily mean, I think it's pretty adaptable. We'll talk about how to research that at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. But you can just take the fruits off. This is what it looks like when it grows out on its own. It gets kind of bushy, kind of large. So you want to leave room for it in your garden if you don't have a large garden or ranch to plant with. But it is something you can just take the fruits off, toss them in a pan, and toast them up and eat them. That's how Antonio recommends that they be consumed. Next slide, please.
So real quick, I want to interject here. We are paying attention to the questions, but we were going to wait until the end of the presentation to answer them. This presentation, we do hope to make it into a PDF that can be sent out via email. And as you were told, it is being recorded and will be on the YouTube channel because we do have a lot of information here. Now, back to the slides. Native trees with edible nuts, fruit for large scale food production, elderberry, holly leaf cherry, and Catalina cherry, black walnut, California fan palm, and our oaks. Acorns were a food staple many people know, but as you can see from our presentation, it was not the only staple food in their traditional diet. Next slide. Next slide. Oh, sorry, stay there. I didn't see it switch. Elderberry is well known as a medicine and food source. The berries ripen in the summer and must be cooked since the seed that is the majority of the berry inside is toxic. This is not a problem when making an herbal syrup preparation or a jam when you simmer the berries. A simple syrup recipe is a half a cup of berries with dried and or fresh ginger simmered for at least an hour. You strain and blend it with an equal measure of raw honey or agave. Elderberry has been, there's research if you go on PubMed.org and look up the botanical name, you will see the researches. They have been shown to be effective on even H1N1 flu viruses. I'm not going to speak to our current virus, except that it is part of the multi-layer attack I've done to be safe from a variety of viruses. I'm going to mention, because I see my co-producer mentioned agave. Be very careful when you're using agave in herbal medicine, because it can have a negative effect on your blood sugar. Again, caution, elderberry seeds are poisonous when eaten uncooked in large quantities. One of the things Joe mentioned, his teacher said it was one of the first recommended as a first native edible plant to start. It is indeed one of the first plants I planted in my yard. If you'll, next slide, please. This is my elderberry tree. She is 12 years old. She is very small for a 12-year-old plant because she is on a west facing next to the sidewalk. In fact, I planted her too close to the sidewalk and have to trim her and tie her back so that my neighbors can walk along the sidewalk. If you give us the next slide. By the time I realized that, she really has gotten to be, back, there should be a slide before that. There we go. This is a healthy 8 or 10-year-old elderberry tree that is on the Claremont campus. So this is what
actually is about 25 years old.
25. So this is how big she is. If I keep trimming her right, maybe she'll grow up and over the sidewalk. Next slide.
Okay, so there's a couple of different types of cherries that are native to California, and you can grow whichever one fits your interests and your needs. Catalina Cherry is native to the island, but is also grows pretty well on the mainland, and it has more flesh on it than the holly leaf cherry. It still has a, comparative to the cherries that we're used to in the grocery store, which are non-native, a fairly large pit. And you can just take the flesh of these plants, either the Catalina or the holly leaf cherry, and just, work with them, cook them, eat them fresh if you wish, in the way that you would the cherries that you buy in the stores. The holly leaf cherry is a smaller bush. It has a very large pit with not very much flesh on it at all, and different leaves if you need that for identification. And you can also find hybrids. But the thing that requires new kitchen skills, next slide please, is what's done with the pit. The pit is used by the indigenous communities of Southern California to make a flour. It's ground up, and I'll talk about that in just a second. But I wanted to show you a picture of Willie Pink. This is an elder from the sort of North San Diego County area, who's been very important in revitalizing a number of indigenous practices, both for tribes, and also he teaches. You can access that. They have their own community college down there, where I believe he teaches sometimes. And there's other resources to get access to his teachings online that we'll talk about at the end of the presentation. Next slide, please. What's done with the pits is you take the fruit off and make your fruit leather, just eat it fresh, whatever you want to do. You dry the pits, and then you can grind them. And of course, this is the traditional way of grinding the pits. And then it can also be ground up in a high-powered blender of some sort, a Vitamix or some other really high-energy one, because they're pretty hard pits. And you can grind them up, make a flour out of it, and then cook with the flour. And this is something that has to be done in a particular way. And this is explained here on this page. This is again from the Chia Cafe cookbook. I believe it might be from another book, but I'm sorry, I've forgotten what picture this is from. Next slide, please. Black walnuts. We have a native walnut here. You can find these walnuts. They grow pretty easily. I know one family in Rancho Cucamonga has probably like 10 of these in their yard, and they don't require a lot of water. This is what the nuts look like. They're relatively small, and the meat inside, the nut meat, is quite small. These nuts are quite hard to get into, so it takes a good bit of work to get to the nut meat. But they're also used as a dye inside this outer sort of brown coating. There's a black flaky material that's used for plant dyeing, for basketry, and for clothing and other purposes. Next slide, please. This is what some mature black walnuts look like. These are at the, what's the name of that place? It's right at the Sunflower Curve and on the 210 freeway. I can't think of the name of this location, but it's very easy to get to from the freeway. And if anyone's interested, feel free to email me. Our email's at the front of the presentation. Next slide, please.
Commons, nope, go back, please.
To the oaks, please. Thank you. Oops. Oak slide, please. Okay, I'll do this one. I'm sorry.
That's right. You inserted that one. I forgot.
Yeah. There is a native palm tree. It's one probably most of us have not seen unless we spend a little time in the Palm Springs area. It grows in the springs there. It also grows in Baja and south from Palm Springs. The fruit here is edible, just fresh off the tree. Sean Milanovich, who's a Cahuilla culture carrier, has introduced me to this particular tree, and it's huge and produces massive amounts of fruit. You can also make, and this is something the Chia Cafe folks, Barbara Drake and Abe Sanchez, do, is they make kind of like a syrup out of it. They'll just add a little water to the fruits after they've been dried and rinsed first and then dried, and then add a little water to a little sweetener, and you get a nice kind of syrup to put on your pancakes in the morning or whatever it is you need syrup for. Next slide, please.
Common Southern California oaks. The preferred taste by our traditional ecological knowledge are the canyon oaks, who have large acorns. That's a Tongva preferred. The black oak with their large acorns is the Cahuilla's preferred taste. They grow at a higher elevation. Other common Southern California oaks is a coast live oak, valley oak, which I believe I have growing in my yard. We will see as she grows older, but Joe thinks that's what one that is, and a Pasadena oak. I will say that I had a squirrel bring me a oak tree to my yard in a pot, and I let it grow, and it is in the ground now. Having said that, because I did not plant the acorn in the pot, we want you to plant or seed your acorns directly in the ground in the fall. You do not want to plant acorns in a pot unless you use a sleeve, often made from an unprinted half-gallon milk carton, so the root can go straight down. If you go get oaks at somewhere like Hahamunga in the watershed below JPL, that's how they have it. And if you are going to grow them yourself, you might be able to ask them or buy those sleeves from them. Calscape.org is one of the best ways to know what oaks are native to your location. Valley oaks and Pasadena oaks were formerly found all over SoCal. When Joe came to visit my yard, when we were making this presentation, he was actually very excited that I had a valley oak, what he believes is a valley oak. And being that it was brought to me, I tend to believe that might be what it is as well. But calscape.org is actually good for finding any of the plants that are specific to your area. You can literally put your address in and get a list of plants. We'll talk more about that in some of the slides. Next slide, please.
So Acorn Flower, you can see it's a multi-step process. It takes quite a lot of work. and not everyone's ready to do all this work. There's going to be some ways to get access to that we'll talk about at the end of the presentation if you don't want to go through this process. But if you want to learn how the acorns are prepared traditionally, you harvest them before the rains come. They do get moldy if they're on the ground and it's rained. They also will have problems with insects and so on. You have to dry them out for quite a long time. The tradition is to dry them many months. There's been some folks at Haudenosaunee and some other places experimenting with oven drying in a very low temperature. It has to be completely dried out before storing, or it does get moldy. I had lost several collections of acorns because of mold, so that's something I had to learn the hard way. You want to store it in a way that's protected from direct light and from insects. Then it's ground, and you use a high-powered blender these days. The tradition was to use grinding stones. Some of you have probably seen granite, large boulders with holes in them from grinding acorns. It took quite a lot of work and quite a lot of time, but apparently it was a lovely social occasion for the people doing the grinding to chat and catch up on what was going on in the neighborhood. You have to sift through the ground acorns to get a fine flour. So use your sifters to pull out the larger pieces and regrind them. Storage. Leaching is the practice that you need a flour sack cloth or some other fairly tight weave cloth to use. You just put the material in the cloth and run water through it over and over again. You can actually taste the tar and taste the flour, taste the tannins, and then you have to just keep doing it until the tannins are gone and the bitterness has gone away. Then you can store that flour or freeze the flour even when it's wet afterwards, I believe. The preparation guide I would recommend is this book by Joe Parker, no relation, It Will Live Forever, Traditional Yosemite Acorn Preparation. That book has been very, very helpful for many tribes all over California to revitalize and resuscitate and renovate their own food practices. Next slide, please. New taste. So there are some plants that were commonly eaten in Southern California. They're easy to grow. Some of them are absolutely beautiful in your yard. Golden Brodea, for example, California Brodea. These are quite lovely looking in your garden, and they're edible. These are corms. The most common one in Southern California was what's called the wild hyacinth, or sometimes called blue dicks. These grow, I believe, at a little bit higher elevation than where many of us live. I know there's a big field of them up by where Magic Mountain is, for example. But they can be grown here. I've grown them in my backyard in Altadena. Ethereal spear, I've been growing that for some years now. What you do with this, the other new taste that we're going to talk about is the California Cleon. It's a relative of the, I forgot the name of the
Caper.
Caper, thank you. I always forget this word, but it's also known as bladderpot. Next slide, please. Traditionally, these the golden Brodea and some of these other corms, they don't need a lot of water, and you don't want to water them during the rainy season, and then they come right up, and you want to harvest them before they go to flower. And what you do is, and this is a list of 5 different ways in which the plants were sort of actively propagated by in indigenous communities. And this is from an RCS, planting guide for Golden Brodea that are very, very important student of traditional ecological practices. Kat Anderson, who's written this book, very, very wonderful book called Tending the Wild. She wrote in RCS planting guide, but what you do normally is you dig under the plant after its stalks are up, and you can find the corms down below. They're kind of like little bulbs, small ones, although technically they're not a bulb. They're like part of the stem. A swollen stem is what corms are, not a bulb. And you can break them off and plant them elsewhere. You can also, what apparently traditionally was done is you just take the small ones there, and they respond very well to this disturbance of the earth, and it helps them increase and spread. Next slide, please. California Cleon, here we go. Let's start with this slide. Thank you. it's also known as bladder pod. It's very easy to grow. It seeds very easily, and it makes great tacos. But I'll warn you about this plant. You want to do something, and this is something we're going to talk about at the next presentation. And this is also something that has to be done with yucca blossoms. You have to rinse it repeatedly. You put it in hot water, the blossoms, and just parboil it for just a few minutes, and you'll see the water will turn yellow. And then you toss that water out into your garden. You can use that for watering your other plants. And then you have to sift out the blossoms out of the water, put it in a fresh pot of water, and then parboil it briefly again. And about the third or fourth time, you'll see that there won't be this yellow color in the water anymore. And that's when, and you can taste them, that's when the bitterness kind of goes away. And they're what the tribes used to call a very strong plant, or strong dish. Maybe it's because the bitterness made them strong, I'm not sure. But you can sort of, through this parboiling process, not have the bitter flavor. And then you can just put it in your tacos. They're very nutritious and a great addition. Next slide, please. So this is just some, I have, the bladder pod that we have in our backyard has been reseeding. It drops its seeds, and then you get these little sprouts. And so it's very easy, doesn't require any maintenance, and it's quite productive. Lots and lots of flowers, lots and lots of seeds. Next slide. Oh, and these are seeds. I'm happy to donate these to, I have a bunch from my backyard to the seed library, and I'll be happy to work with the seed library and building up your native plant seed collection if that's useful. Next slide. Prep before planting. So this is something about native plants, and this is also true for many of us who are do a lot of gardening. You kind of do this pretty actively anytime you're going to put in a new plant. You want to think about soil types. Some of the plants love sandy soils. Some plants grow in sandy soils. They need the heavier soils, the clay soils. Think about sun exposure. Not all of them can take, especially inland, the full sun. Some of them need that onshore flow, kind of cloudy conditions if they're more of a coastal variety. Climate conditions, do they need the coastal moisture in the mornings or not? Are they okay with the dry heat of, now that we're having climate change? This is one of the very important factors, obviously, to think about. And when choosing the variety, there are many varieties. We've given you a number of different plants, but there's lots and lots of varieties of many of these plants that have been developed, sometimes by nursery, sometimes through the natural process. Watering, not all California natives can take water in the summer. So if you have an irrigation system set up, you'll have to turn it off for those plants, at least for where those plants are growing. Other plants really need summer water. An elderberry, for example, you want to water it at least once a month in the worst of the summer heat. It has very shallow roots and is sensitive. The dry conditions, I'll go out after Santana winds come through and dry everything out. I'll go out and just water the ground at the base of the elderberry tree. Size and spacing. Some of these plants get pretty big, so you have to be ready. Krystal's example of the elderberry tree is a really good example. You can also produce a lot of pruning work for yourself if you're not careful about where you plant it. We planted some mallow right near our sidewalk in the front yard, and sure enough, we have to go out there and prune it all the time. Mallow grows very enthusiastically. If you want information about these factors, Theodore Payne has this amazing, if you don't already know this database, amazing nursery databases under their learning education tab, and here's the web address for that. And it has almost information for almost all the plants we've talked about here today and most native plants that you might be looking for. Next slide, please. Is this you or me, Krystal? I think this is you.
All right, online California native edible plant information. We're kind of repeating some stuff, but they're important. There's a set of PBS Autry Museum videos called Tending the Wild, Grow Your Own Chia, PBS Autry. And then I found a blog post, My SoCal Garden. This is a blog post that is specifically about edible California native plants. Next slide. Again, the edible native plant websites. The California Native Plant Society has a specific, this is a link to a specific edible information. Calscape.org, which is also one of my #1 go-tos for native plants. This is a specific list of edible plants. Larner Seeds is California Cuisine Seeds. This is a link from Joe I haven't followed yet. This is, again, Theodore Payne, specifically a native plant, the plant list that's edible. And we've also added a medicinal plant walk with James Adams. He does not necessarily in this video talk a lot about edible natives. I'm an herbalist by avocation, and James Adams is a pharmacologist professor from USC that worked with Chumash elder Cecilia Garcia for 14 years. He is her lineage carrier. And this is a very recent plant walk. They are wearing masks. It is out at the location. It's a ranch on Mulholland and Malibu Canyon, where one of the many places that he does walks. And I wanted to mention something because I'm doing it today. As far as edible, he mentions white sage. I know somebody had a question about whether Yerba Santa was the same, and it is not. But one of the easiest, best ways to consume white sage is 1 leaf at a time in a bottle of water. And it happens to be in my bottle of water right now. He mentions a couple other medicinal uses of plants that are not edible uses, but he has a wide variety of videos that you can find online. Just search on his name. And I just wanted to give you one, and I talked a lot about it. So next slide, please.
Okay, so these are some resources if you're interested in Indigenous knowledge resources. Some published books have been available for some time, and then a wonderful book just came out, Ethnobotany, that's from North San Diego area down into northern Baja. That's the Cahuilla Ethnobotany book. Healing with Medicinal Plants of the West is by the folks that Krystal was just talking about. That's a great resource. The kind of grandmother of these books was published in 1972 by Malky Museum Press. And Malky Museum is a great resource as well for learning about the Cahuilla culture and plant uses. They have a lovely garden. It's out right near the Morongo Casino. And that's by an elder, Catherine Shivas Sabo, who's a relative of the albino Shiva that I mentioned earlier. And then ethnographer and historian Lowell John Bean, who worked with her to put this book together. It's a little bit out of date, but it's been an enormous resource for many of the tribes in the Southern California area. Jan Timbrook, I believe she still works at the Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History, wrote Ethnobotany. And then I just wanted to for those of you interested in Native Nation food and culture symposium, the Tohono O'odham, who I already mentioned, have been important for a lot of the Southern California tribes in reviving their traditional food practices, are having their biannual, every 2 years, they have this food symposium and culture symposium, and it's happening next month, in about a month from today. So if you're interested, you can check that out. That's in southern Arizona, down below Tucson. Next slide, please. Okay, whoops, back to ingredients, please. Thank you, Jessica. Thank you. For those of you who cook and don't want to wait for the ingredients to come from your own backyard, you can find stuff online many times, and in grocery stores for that matter. You can find, I understand, acorn flour in some Asian or even maybe, I'm not sure, maybe other grocery stores, Whole Foods or some other health food stores might have acorn flour, but it's not going to be necessarily from the Southern California oak trees. You know, chia, the chia that you can find in all the stores used to be an Argentinian, very different variety of chia than what grows here. But you can find for example, the Southern California elderberry dried elderberry and dried elderflower on a website called Dragon Marsh, and that's a store. Some of you may know the store. It's in Riverside. Stinging nettle, you can find the local varieties at mountainroseherbs.com, but you know, you can also find stinging nettle. It does grow. It's quite, some would call it weedy. It just grows all over. And once you get it started, it does, you know, travel. So you got to, you can find it in a lot of people's gardens. They may not even know that they have a wonderful edible plant in their garden. Prickly pear nectar, if you don't want to go to the trouble of growing your own and then chopping and cleaning, you can blending, you can get the nectar from this particular website. Tepary beans, SanXavierCoop.org, nativeseeds.org. If you're going to plant these seeds, you want to pay attention. Some of the varieties have a particular type of disease that's rid of, and so they're edible, but you don't necessarily want to plant those particular varieties. And just pay attention to what the website says. Mesquite flower, same sources. We're going to talk a lot more about mesquite at our next presentation. Acorn flower by acornflower.com, but you can find acorn flower in other stores if you'd like. Next slide, please. Other resources. These are sources where if you want to take classes, if you want to look stuff up online, just learn more about the organizations that are doing this kind of work. Chia Cafe Collective has a Facebook page. Haramonia has their own website. Idyllwildarts.org in the summer. I think their registration for adult classes happens on February 15th for this coming up summer. The Chia Cafe Collective, I'm sorry to say, has just lost 2 of its members, but they're going to still be teaching this summer, is what I've heard. James Adams, Chris has already mentioned his work and how to find him. You got to Google around. There's lots of good resources. Deborah Small has a wonderful website. She's an educator, member of the Chia Cafe Collector, and a photographer, and amazing videos of elders working with tribal members teaching these skills. And then a lovely article about the Kumeyaay practices in preserving native foods. And then probably, well, for a seed library, this book I'm sure is quite well known in the seed library group. Seed Propagation of Native California Plants is an amazing book. I just had a friend recommend it to me again yesterday. Thank you, Barbara. I think you're on the call. But it's a really, really helpful book to know if you need to scarify a plant, a seed before planting it. It's got all kinds of tremendous resource. Next slide, please.
So California native plants and SoCal nurseries and seed sources. Several of our favorites are the California Botanical Garden in Claremont, formerly known as Rancho Santa Ana Botanical Garden, Theodore Payne Nurseries in Sun Valley, Hahamung Nursery is in the Arroyo Seco, Pasadena area. They're below the JPL, the watershed below JPL. It's kind of dead center in the middle of that park. So you follow the signs and wind around the park. The Mejia Nursery in Moore Park, they often work with the California Native Plant Society. And I'm not sure if it's them or Theodore Payne that will be next weekend, February 13th. There is a native plant fair at the Tarzana Community Cultural Center on Ventura Boulevard, just east of Tampa. So between Tampa and Reseda Boulevard. And there's a link to that. That is the California Native Plant Society and other local organizations involved with that. And it's a lovely site if you've never been there. Also, I want to mention the seed propagation book that Joe said at the end of the other slide. That is a collection of pamphlets that were made over the years by the Santa Barbara Botanical Garden that were created into that book. I originally found that when I did my first presentation on seed saving for the native garden. And the one thing that is not on here that I will mention again, we've mentioned calscape.org. Calscape.org is by the California Native Plant Society, CNPS. And when you look up the plants, in addition to about them and how to care for them and where to plant them, there also is a resource list of what nurseries have them in stock. Do know that CalScape is for the entire state of California. So some of the nurseries will be up in the Bay Area, but there are a significant number of nurseries here in Southern California, a couple more that aren't on this list that are a little farther south. Next slide.
So please join us for part 2. We don't know exactly when that's going to be, but I'm sure Slola will be announcing that. There's lots more edible native plants in California, many more, and we're going to introduce a bunch more. We would like to have a little tasting festival at the event. We'll talk about garden maintenance for native plants and lots of other topics. So there, and that's it for everybody.
And thank you for your patience while we shared all this so that we could get you as much information as possible, because I know I've seen many questions slide through the chat. I think that Sue was going to help us with that.
Yeah, go ahead, Sue, take it away. It is 11 o'clock. So I understand if you need to duck out, we all understand, everybody's got schedules, but please hang on if you want to listen to the Q&A.
Okay, we've got some good fun questions that did not get answered in the feed. Most of them did, a lot of them by our attendees, which is wonderful to have so many people showing up who know so many things. Okay, Kimberly asked, can you post the links in chat? Now, you had said you're going to make the slide deck available to our members?
Yes, we're happy to do that if that works for Lola. So we're happy to do that, and we can just have it emailed to the folks if that's possible.
Yeah, we can get the slide deck emailed, and we'd also post the links in our email directly. So if you're not on our email list and would like to get the links and all that, please email us. I'll put our contact information in the chat again.
Okay, next question, and this is a question from me. Is palm fruit different from dates?
Oh yes, they're small, quite small. They have a little seed in them, but it's quite different from a date that we know. It's a different fruit.
Are they the orange ones? Joe,
No.
Are they orange?
The ones I've seen are dark brown.
Okay.
Okay, so they kind of look like tiny dates then, maybe?
Yeah, kind of like a caper looks like a green olive.
Okay, thank you. Now, Kimberly asked, do you harvest acorns from the tree or after they fall?
Either way works. What I have tried is if I'm out, if we have, like this year we had really early rain, so most of the acorns fell after the rain had come, and which means they're probably not going to be great in terms of mold and insects and so on. So you can harvest direct from the tree. Native people did harvest direct from the tree. So it's certainly something that can be done, especially if it's a year with early rain. If it's not, you have to be out looking for when the trees drop their acorns and then just go get it as soon as you can before the rains come. One other caution about gathering acorns is don't gather near a road, because there will be runoff from gasoline and some other problematic things you don't want in your food sources. So do be careful about that. Don't gather from, let's say, a lawn where they sprayed what's it called, Monsanto, I can't remember the name of the
Roundup.
Roundup. So you have to be careful about where you gather.
Also,
Okay.
I will interject about gathering. It was mentioned when I watched the video with James Adams. It was done on one of the California state parks as part of the Santa Monica Mountains, as there is a hefty fine if you collect from state or national parks. You can collect from BLM land, but it is best to get permission from the ranger for that.
And you can get permits from state and national parks to harvest. You have to go into their office and submit a form, but that's something they do. They do give out those permits.
Right, but know that it can be several $100s if you, which is why I encourage you to forage many things in your own yard.
Good advice.
Although my oak tree is a long ways from producing acorns yet.
Okay, well, I just let the squirrels have mine, but my oak tree is by the street, so it's not for me anyway. Okay, Sarah wants to know, what are the medicinal benefits of white sage in your water?
So white sage is antimicrobial, but not in a way that is going to negatively affect your gut biome. So it's just a slow, sustainable way to have some antimicrobial properties. And it also can really help you focus. It's one of the reasons why I got reminded. I was putting some leaves into my dryer this morning and found some white sage that I don't harvest a lot of my white sage. I grow white sage in my yard because it needs to be planted. We have a lot of, when I mentioned over harvesting, rather than just collecting leaves, there have been people, I'm sickened to say, literally pull it up by the roots. I'm not sure what they were thinking, because if you want to go back and harvest something, that's not the way to go about it. So I don't use a lot of white sage in my practices, but I have friends who do. They are usually gifted 1 or 2 leaves from the plant at a time, but I broke off a branch. So I had set them in the dryer, and then I have a tendency to forget my plants in there. But I was reminded, oh, put one in your water today. So it can really make you a little more alert, a little more paying attention. So, and that was something I was taught in a class with the late Cecilia Garcia herself. So always use 1 leaf at a time, not the bundles that you see also, those were ways to transport them, not to use them. So buy it in a bundle and break it apart if you must.
Thank you.
You've probably seen there's a lot of overlap between medicinal plants and food plants. And if you read the ethnobotanic resources, you'll see the plants have multiple uses, and that's why medicinal plants are coming up in a food presentation.
Okay,
and we have an herbalist as one of the presenters.
we have 2 more questions here. Okay, David asks, he says, I have some datura. Is there a way to process for tea?
I don't, that's something that you have to be very, very cautious with. And I would just say, I would not just put that in your tea unless you have someone who's some sort of teacher to work with you and explain to you how that particular plant works. That's a very powerful plant. And that's something to approach with some caution.
I will also mention that it is a psychotropic plant, just to be very medicinal about it. And it is easily absorbed through your skin. I would handle that plant with gloves.
Wow.
And when you're using it, in addition to working with a teacher, have someone with you. This isn't a class to really talk about that, except to use extreme caution. And I will say I just planted one in my yard. But I will be honest, I was so careful about where I chose to plant that, that I wanted to make sure that it didn't affect my neighbors. I have neighbors who have children on 2 sides. And when I was choosing where to plant it, I wanted to make sure that plant was not going to grow through the fencing. So that is how powerful a plant. So we're just going to extreme caution. Don't touch it barehanded.
Okay, and the final question. Anthony asks, are there any tips for shelling black walnuts? And I will add, besides a hammer, because
A big hammer?
that.
One of the elders that I worked with, she had something that looks like, if you know what mancala is, it's a game where there's a flat piece of wood with small sort of rounded parts in it. And she would put the walnut in there and then get out a kitchen knife. And so it's to try and kind of stabilize it. You get out a kitchen knife, and there's a small, kind of like a crease around. Once you take that outer shell off, you can see the small kind of ring that runs around the plant. You put the knife right in there and then hit it pretty hard. And it takes a skill. You often end up like shooting walnuts off the board. But it can be done, and it was done, you know, and they used stones instead of hammers in the old days. But it's a learned skill, but you can pick it up. You can make yourself, get a Moncala board, or make yourself, if you're a woodworker, some sort of device to try and stabilize the walnuts when you hit them hard, and you got to hit them pretty hard.
Oh my God, what a great presentation this has been.
So I'm going to remind people that Joe and I both chose to put our emails publicly on the presentation. We are both open to questions. Joe is more knowledgeable about the TEK because he's had some extensive classes that I hope to follow and meet those elders who are still doing. I also I'm always excited to share my natives. My native front yard has been growing for a number of years, and I've been expanding to my backyard now. And I'm always happy to invite you to have a cup of nettle tea in my backyard and forage and what have you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank
Thank
for
you
the
so
opportunity
much.
to share this.
Thank you so much to Joe and Krystal for sharing what they know, and we look forward to having you back. So to expand, it seems like there's so much information to yet cover. And thank you just so much. So everybody, yeah, we'll send out all the slide deck and links to our email. We'll post the recording of the video, hopefully in the next week. And yeah, and we'll keep you informed, and we'll look forward to having you back.